Dawn always came quietly to the plains. Before the sun showed itself, the land already knew it was coming. The tall grass lay still under a pale sky, silvered with dew. Far off, the low hills held their breath as a thin line of light crept along the horizon. There were no church bells here, no clocks marking the hour. Only the slow turning of night into morning, the way it had always been. At the edge of the dirt road that cut through the settlement stood a small blacksmith's forge, built from rough timber and dark stone. Its roof sagged slightly with age, and its walls were stained black from years of smoke. Most folks passed it without much thought. But before the sun rose, before the town stirred, that forge was already awake. Flynn Carter rose before the light every morning without fail. He swung his legs from the narrow bed, pulled on worn boots, and stepped into the cool air. The smell of damp earth mixed with old ash greeted him like an old companion. He didn't linger. He never did. Life had taught him that fire waited for no man. Inside the forge, Flynn struck a match and fed the hearth with dry wood and coal. Sparks leapt, eager and sharp. Soon the fire caught, breathing heat into the cold space. Orange light danced across the walls, across the anvil that had been in the same place longer than anyone remembered. Flynn's hands moved with practiced ease. Thick, scarred, and steady, they had shaped more iron than he could count. He heated steel until it glowed, laid it on the anvil, and brought the hammer down in a rhythm as old as the frontier itself. Ring, ring, ring. The sound carried down the dirt road, low and familiar, telling the town that the day had begun. He forged horseshoes first, like he always did. Ranchers trusted him with their best animals. A bad shoe could break a horse, and a broken horse could ruin a man. Flynn never rushed that kind of work. He shaped plow blades next, then nails and hinges. Nothing fancy, nothing meant to impress, just tools made to last. Flynn didn't talk much while he worked. He never felt the need to fill the air with words. The fire spoke. The iron answered. That was enough. By mid-morning, the town began to wake. A ranch hand might stop by with a mule. A farmer might lean against the post and wait quietly for his turn. They didn't bother Flynn with small talk. They knew better, but they trusted him. In a place where life depended on strong tools and stronger hands, trust mattered more than charm. Flynn had earned that trust slowly, the way everything was earned out here. He had no wife waiting for him inside a warm house, no children running barefoot in the dirt. His forge was his home, and the small room behind it was enough. A table, a bed, a wash basin. That was all he needed. He cooked simple meals, slept when the work was done, and rose again before dawn. People sometimes asked if he ever thought about settling down. He always gave the same answer, a small shrug, a quiet smile. Life was already full enough. The fire needed tending. The work needed doing. Inside, he believed it. Flynn had learned long ago not to expect more from life than what it offered him. He was a blacksmith on the frontier. That was not a man meant for big dreams or grand futures. He left such things to ranch owners, traders, and men with land that stretched farther than the eye could see. There was comfort in knowing his place. As the sun climbed higher, its light spilled across the plains and caught the smoke rising from his forge. Flynn paused for a moment, wiping his hands on a cloth, and looked out over the land. The grass rolled on endlessly, shaped by wind and time. It was harsh country, but honest, like the work he did, like the life he lived. Flynn Carter believed his days would pass this way, one after another, measured by the heat of the fire and the weight of the hammer. He believed there would be no great turning points, no moments worth remembering beyond the steady rhythm of work and rest, and he was content with that. He did not know then that his path would soon bend in a direction he had never considered, that before long he would find himself sitting in a place that did not belong to him, facing a future he had never planned to claim. For now there was only the forge, the fire, and the man who lived by it, certain that this was all his life would ever be. Rowan Mercer was the kind of man people noticed long before he spoke. His ranch stretched wide along the rolling land east of town, fences running so far they seemed to melt into the horizon. Cattle moved across his fields like slow, living shadows. He had barns taller than most houses, horses bred from good stock, and men who worked for him because they trusted his word. In a place like this, that mattered more than money, though Rowan had plenty of that too. Flynn had known Rowan most of his life. They weren't cut from the same cloth, and everyone could see it. Rowan wore clean shirts and good boots. Flynn wore leather stiff with age and clothes that smelled faintly of smoke. But years back, when the town was still young and the land still fighting back, they had worked side by side. Rowan had brought the land under control. Flynn had kept tools and iron alive. Different paths, same dust under their boots. That counted for something. So when Rowan rode into town one late afternoon, his horse lathered and his face pale beneath the brim of his hat, Flynn noticed right away. "You look like hell," Flynn said, leaning against the forge door. Rowan tried to laugh but ended up coughing instead. He swung down from the saddle slower than usual. "Fever," he muttered. "Came on fast. Shouldn't even be riding." Flynn poured him water without asking. Rowan drank like a man who hadn't slept in days. After a moment, Rowan cleared his throat. "I wouldn't be here if it wasn't important." Flynn waited. He always did. "There's a meeting set for tomorrow," Rowan said. "By the river, with the Apache family from the South Bend." Flynn raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "It's been arranged," Rowan went on. "Talk of marriage. Something respectful. Something proper." Flynn felt a strange tightening in his chest. Arrangements like that belonged to men with land, cattle, and futures planned years ahead, not to blacksmiths who live by the fire. "I'm supposed to be there," Rowan said, "but I won't make it. Doctor says I shouldn't leave the ranch." Silence settled between them, broken only by the low crackle of the forge. Rowan shifted his weight, uncomfortable now. "I need you to go." Flynn stared at him. "You've lost your mind." "Just hear me out," Rowan said quickly. "You don't need to pretend to be me. Just sit there. Explain I couldn't come. Keep things civil." Flynn shook his head. "That's not my place." "I know," Rowan said, "but you're the only one I trust not to turn it into a mess." Flynn looked down at his hands. Hands blackened by soot, knuckles thick and scarred. Those hands didn't belong at a meeting arranged between families. They belonged to iron and heat and work that left no room for pretense. "I don't belong in things like this," Flynn said quietly. Rowan's voice softened. "That's exactly why I'm asking." He took a breath, steadying himself. "I need someone who won't lie. Someone who'll show respect. Someone who knows what honor means out here." Flynn didn't answer right away. Outside, the wind moved through the grass, carrying the scent of dust and distant water. He thought of the forge, the fire waiting to be tended. He thought of how clean and simple his life was when it stayed inside its own boundaries. This was stepping beyond them. "I won't dress it up," Flynn said. "I won't make promises." Rowan nodded. "I don't need promises, just courtesy." Flynn met his eyes. "Just sitting there," he repeated. "That's all." "That's all, Wonarud," Rowan said. The words hung heavy in the air. Flynn knew what was being asked of him. Not just a favor, but a step into a world that wasn't his. Meetings by the river, conversations weighted with expectation, people measuring worth by things he'd never had. Every instinct told him to refuse. But the frontier ran on more than instinct. It ran on reputation, on loyalty, on men keeping their word when it mattered. Rowan had stood by him years ago, when the forge roof collapsed and no one else could spare the time or lumber. He had never forgotten that. "Fine," Flynn said at last. "I'll go." Relief crossed Rowan's face, quick and honest. "Thank you." Flynn wiped his hands on a rag and turned back toward the fire. "Just don't expect miracles." Rowan managed a thin smile. "Wouldn't dream of it." As Rowan rode away, the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the dirt road. Flynn stood there longer than usual, watching the dust settle. He felt it then, the quiet shift inside his chest, a sense that he had just agreed to something that would not stay small. Flynn Carter had lived his life knowing exactly where he belonged. But now, for reasons he couldn't fully name, he was about to sit in a place that had never been meant for him. And somewhere beyond the river, a path was already waiting. The river ran slow that afternoon, wide and patient, cutting a silver path through the land. Cottonwood trees lined the bank, their leaves whispering in the warm breeze. Near the bend where the water curved south stood an old wooden porch, built years ago as neutral ground. It was where deals were spoken carefully, where words mattered more than volume, and where two worlds met without crossing lines. Flynn arrived on foot. He hadn't bothered to change much. The same shirt he wore at the forge clung to him, darkened with soot along the sleeves. The smell of hot iron still followed him, sharp and unmistakable. His hands were rough, palms thick with calluses earned over years of work. He wiped them once against his trousers, though he knew it made little difference. He stopped at the edge of the porch and took a breath. This wasn't his ground. He could feel it in the stillness, in the way the air seemed to wait. Beyond the porch near the riverbank, a few members of the Apache family stood together, speaking softly among themselves. Their presence was calm, rooted, like the land itself. And then he saw her. She sat on the far end of the porch, away from the others, her posture relaxed but attentive. She didn't fidget. She didn't look around for reassurance. She simply watched the river as if she had all the time in the world. Her dark hair fell loose over her shoulders, moving gently with the breeze. When she turned, her eyes were sharp, not hard but aware. Flynn stepped forward, boots creaking against the old boards. "Afternoon," he said. She looked up at him, studying him openly. Not rudely, just honestly. "You're late," she said. He nodded once. "I am." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The river filled the silence. "I'm not the man you were expecting," Flynn said at last. He figured there was no use dragging it out. "Rowan couldn't come. He asked me to sit in. Just to explain." She didn't react the way he expected. There was no sharp intake of breath, no tightening of the jaw, no look of disappointment. She tilted her head slightly, as if weighing his words, then nodded. "So," she said calmly, "you're not the ranch owner?" "No," Flynn replied. "I'm the blacksmith." That earned a flicker of interest in her eyes. She stood then, moving with quiet confidence. Up close, Flynn noticed the strength in her stance, the way she carried herself without needing to prove anything. She held his gaze unblinking. "My name is Emma," she said. "Flynn," he answered. The introduction felt simple. Right. She gestured toward the bench beside her. "Sit." Flynn hesitated, then did as she asked. The porch creaked beneath his weight. He was acutely aware of how he must look. Clothes stained from work, hands still smelling of iron and fire. He rested them on his knees, unsure what to do with them. "You work with metal," Emma said, not as a question. "Yes." She glanced at his hands again. "It shows." Flynn almost smiled. "The meeting was arranged for Rowan," she said. "But he sent you." "He did." She looked back toward the river. "And you came anyway." Flynn followed her gaze. The water moved steadily, unchanged by their presence. "Out here," he said slowly, "when a man gives his word, it matters." Emma considered that. Even when the word puts him somewhere he doesn't belong? Flynn met her eyes. Especially then. That did it. Something in her expression softened. Not into warmth exactly, but into understanding. She could have stood up then. She could have thanked him and walked back to her family. That would have been the proper thing to do. The expected thing. But she didn't. Instead, she stayed seated and folded her hands in her lap. "Tell me about your forge," she said. Flynn blinked. "My forge?" "Yes, the fire, the work." He shifted, surprised. "It's small, old, does what it needs to." She waited, patient. So he told her. About the way iron changed color when it was ready, about how a steady hand mattered more than strength, about how mistakes couldn't be undone once the metal cooled. He spoke plainly without dressing it up. Emma listened, truly listened. Her eyes never left his face. When he finished, she nodded. "You don't pretend to be something you're not." "No point in that," Flynn said. "Fire sees through lies." A faint smile touched her lips. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the porch. Somewhere behind them, voices rose and fell, but the space between Flynn and Emma felt separate, quiet, intent. Emma stood at last. "You're not the man I was sent to meet," she said. Flynn's chest tightened. "I know. But you showed up," she continued. "You told the truth, and you stayed." She met his eyes once more. "That counts for something." She turned and walked back toward her family, leaving Flynn alone on the bench, the smell of river water and iron still clinging to him. Flynn watched her go, a strange weight settling in his chest. He had come to sit in another man's place, expecting nothing to come of it. But as he rose from the porch and started back toward the dirt road, he knew one thing for certain. This meeting, meant to be brief and proper, had already become something else entirely. They did not rush to leave. The sun hung low above the river, turning the water the color of old copper. The porch stood quiet again, the earlier voices drifting farther away, leaving only the soft sound of wind moving through the cottonwoods. Flynn and Emma remained where they were, not because either had asked the other to stay, but because neither felt ready to go. "So," Emma said at last, her eyes still on the water, "do you work with horses often?" "Every day," Flynn answered. "A rancher's horse is worth more than his rifle out here. Bad shoe, bad ride. Bad ride can end a man. She nodded once, as if that truth needed no further explanation. My people say a horse knows the hands that touch it. It remembers. Flynn considered that. I believe it. They sat in silence for a moment, the kind that didn't press for words. Then Flynn spoke again, surprising himself. The land treats everyone the same, he said. Doesn't matter who owns it. You work it wrong, it turns on you. Emma smiled faintly. That's what the elders taught us. The river, too. It gives, but it never belongs to anyone. She pointed to the slow-moving water. That bend floods every spring. People try to fight it. The river always wins. Flynn followed her gesture. Fire's the same way. You don't control it. You learn how to stand with it. That earned her full attention. Fire scares some people. It should, he said simply, but fear keeps your hands steady. Emma studied his face, as if seeing something beneath the soot and quiet reserve. You talk about fire like it listens. In a way it does. He told her then about the forge, not as a place of work, but as a living thing. About waking before dawn to feed the hearth. About watching iron turn from dull gray to bright orange, the moment when it became willing to change. He spoke of patience, of waiting for the right heat, of how rushing ruined everything. Emma listened without interrupting. When he finished, she spoke softly. The plains are like that. They look empty to outsiders, but they're alive. They watch. They remember. She told him about running along the river in the early mornings, when the fog still clung to the ground. About knowing where the soil turned soft after rain, where the grass hid stones sharp enough to cut bare feet. About the way the land held stories, if you learned how to listen. Flynn found himself leaning forward, drawn by the calm certainty in her voice. They did not ask each other about the future. They did not speak of why they were there or what was expected of them. There were no careful questions, no testing glances. Just words passed back and forth like tools laid gently on a bench. As the light faded, the air cooled. A distant bird cried out, then went quiet. At some point, Flynn realized how long they had been sitting there. I should head back, he said, though he didn't move right away. Emma nodded. Before dark. They stood together at the edge of the porch. For a moment, neither reached for anything. Not a handshake, not a farewell meant to linger. The space between them remained unclaimed. Thank you for coming, Emma said. For listening, Flynn replied. She met his eyes then, and something unspoken passed between them. Not promise, not hope, just recognition. Emma turned first, walking toward the river path where her family waited. Flynn watched her until she disappeared among the trees. When he finally turned away, the land felt different. The road back to town stretched long and quiet. Flynn walked it slowly, the rhythm of his boots matching the thoughts he didn't quite name. The forge would be waiting. The fire would need tending. Life would go on exactly as it always had. And yet, the smell of iron clung to him, but now it mixed with river air and the memory of her voice. He found himself thinking of the way she spoke about the land, about how her words settled rather than stirred. There had been no agreement, no reason to expect more. Still, as the first stars appeared overhead, Flynn knew he would remember that porch, the river, the silence between them. It had been a meeting with no invitation to return. And yet, long after the light had faded, its echo remained. Flynn did not expect to see her again. Days passed after the meeting by the river, and life settled back into its familiar rhythm. The forge woke before dawn. The fire answered when he fed it. Iron rang beneath the hammer, steady and honest. If Emma crossed his mind, he didn't linger there. Some moments were meant to pass through a man's life without staying. That's what he told himself. Then one morning, just as the sun cleared the low hills, he heard footsteps where there were usually none. Flynn looked up from the anvil. Emma stood at the edge of the forge yard, a clay water jug balanced easily against her hip. She didn't call out. She waited until he noticed her, calm as ever, as if she belonged there. I was nearby, she said simply. Thought you might want this. She held out the jug. Flynn took it, surprised by how natural the exchange felt. That's kind of you. She nodded once and stepped closer, her eyes moving over the forge with quiet curiosity. The fire crackled behind him, throwing light and shadow across the darkened walls. I don't mean to stay long, she said. Just wanted to see where the iron comes alive. Flynn hesitated, then stepped aside. You can watch. Just mind the sparks. She smiled faintly and moved to a safe distance, settling onto a low wooden stool. She didn't speak as he worked. She didn't ask questions right away. She simply watched, the way the metal changed color, the way his shoulders shifted with each strike, the way the hammer met the anvil with practiced certainty. The forge felt different with her there. Not louder, not softer, just aware. When he finished shaping the piece, Emma spoke. My uncle needs a new knife, one for skinning. The old one's worn thin. Flynn nodded. I can make one. She didn't haggle, didn't rush him. She thanked him and stayed, hands folded loosely in her lap. She began to come by more often after that. Sometimes she brought water, sometimes dried herbs wrapped in cloth. Once she brought nothing at all, just herself, standing quietly near the doorway while Flynn worked. She never interrupted, never asked him to stop, and somehow he never minded her presence. One afternoon, while shaping the knife for her uncle, he gestured toward the hammer resting near her. If you're curious, he said, you can hand me that. She stood and did, her fingers brushing his as he took it. The contact was brief, accidental, but it lingered longer than the heat of the iron. She withdrew her hand first, expression unchanged, though her eyes held something thoughtful. Flynn turned back to the anvil, heart beating a little harder than usual. The firelight played across her face as she watched him work. It caught the curve of her cheek, the steady focus in her gaze. She looked at the forge the way she looked at the land, like something alive, worthy of respect. You don't fight the metal, she said once. You listen to it. Flynn glanced at her, surprised. That's right. My grandmother said the same about the river, Emma replied. Force makes it cruel. Patience makes it kind. The days grew warmer. The forge doors stayed open longer. Townsfolk noticed her sitting nearby, quiet and unassuming, as if she had always been part of the place. Some nodded politely. Others watched with curiosity but said nothing. Flynn didn't ask why she kept coming back. He only knew that the forge no longer felt empty when she wasn't there, and that was new. The knife was finished after several days. Flynn wrapped it carefully and handed it to her. She tested the weight, the balance. You made it well. That's the only way I know how, he said. She met his eyes. I believe that. She stayed a while longer that day, even after the work was done. They sat near the open doors, the fire reduced to embers, the air filled with the smell of warm iron and dust. They spoke of small things, the weather, the condition of the road near the river, the way spring always arrived before anyone was ready. When she finally rose to leave, the sun was already dipping west. I'll come by again, she said, as if stating a simple fact. Flynn nodded. You're welcome. She left without ceremony, her footsteps fading into the distance. Flynn stood alone once more, but the silence had changed. It wasn't hollow anymore. It carried memory, presence, expectation he didn't yet have words for. He banked the fire and closed the forge for the night, aware of something growing quietly, steadily, like iron heating beneath the coals. Whatever this was, it didn't need naming. The frontier had a way of noticing change. It didn't announce it loudly. It didn't confront it head on. It whispered first, moving through open doors and across dirt roads, settling into conversations meant to sound harmless. Flynn heard it in the pauses that followed Emma's name, in the way eyes lingered a moment too long when she sat near the forge. At first he pretended not to notice, but the words found him anyway. A blacksmith, someone muttered one afternoon outside the general store. That's all he is. Another voice, low but clear enough, followed. She could do better. Plenty of men with land around here. Flynn kept his head down and walked on, the weight of their voices pressing heavier than the hammer in his hand. He had known this would come. The frontier was honest, but it was not always kind. Emma felt it too. She didn't say anything at first. She never complained. But there were moments, small ones, when her gaze lingered elsewhere, when her usual calm carried an edge of thoughtfulness. Once, as they sat near the forge at dusk, she spoke quietly. Some of the women in town talked today. Flynn waited. They asked why I spent so much time here, she continued. Said there were men with better prospects. He nodded as if it was nothing. But something inside him tightened. And what did you say? He asked. Emma looked at him steadily. I said I chose where I wanted to be. The words should have eased him. Instead, they stirred something darker. That same week, Rowan came by the forge. He rode in like he always did, straight-backed, confident, the picture of success in a land that measured worth by acreage and livestock. He watched Flynn work for a while before speaking, his eyes following the hammer's rise and fall. She's been spending a lot of time here, Rowan said at last. Flynn didn't look up. She has. Rowan shifted his weight. People are talking. People always do. Rowan sighed. You know what I mean. She's Apache. She's got her own place in this world. She deserves security. Flynn set the hammer down slowly. You think I can't give her that? Rowan hesitated. I think she could have more. Land. Cattle. A future that doesn't smell like smoke. The words hit harder than Flynn expected. Rowan wasn't cruel. He wasn't mocking. That made it worse. She's not a thing to be given, Flynn said quietly. Rowan held up his hands. I'm not saying she is. I'm saying you need to think about what you're asking her to give up. That night, Flynn lay awake longer than usual. The forge was quiet. The fire had long since died down. In the dark, doubts crept in where certainty once lived. He thought of Emma's calm presence, the way she belonged wherever she stood. He thought of his forge, small, smoky, unchanging. Was he holding her here because he wanted her, or because he was afraid to let go? The question gnawed at him. The next time Emma came by, he noticed how she watched the road before stepping into the yard, how she seemed to carry more weight in her silence. They said something to you, he said. She didn't deny it. They think I should choose a different life. And what do you think? He asked. Emma met his eyes. I think people confuse comfort with belonging. Her words stayed with him long after she left. Flynn began to pull back, not in anger, but in caution. He spoke less. He kept his hands busy. He told himself he was doing the right thing, that giving her space was better than holding her close. But the forge felt colder without her steady presence. At night, the whispers returned, louder now because they had found room inside him. You are just a blacksmith. She will regret this. You are keeping her from more. Flynn had always known his place in the world. He had been comfortable with it. Now, for the first time, he questioned whether that place was big enough for two. And the thought that he might be the barrier in her path weighed heavier than iron. Emma did not stop coming to the forge. That, in some ways, made it harder. She still arrived in the mornings or late afternoons, stepping into the yard with the same quiet confidence. She still brought water now and then, still sat near the open doors when the heat grew heavy inside. But the easy rhythm they had found together began to fray at the edges. She spoke less. When she did, her words stayed close to the surface. About the weather, the condition of the road, the river running high or low. She no longer lingered with her questions. She watched Flynn work from a little farther away, hands folded, gaze thoughtful. Flynn noticed everything. He answered politely, briefly. He kept his focus on the iron, on the hammer, on the things that did not ask him to feel more than he could manage. When she entered the forge, he felt it like a change in pressure, but he didn't turn right away. Neither of them wanted to be the first to reach across the growing distance. The forge filled with longer silences. Not the comfortable ones they once shared, but heavier ones that pressed against the ears. The fire cracked and popped too loudly. The anvil rang sharper than before. Sometimes when Flynn lifted his head, he would find Emma watching him. Their eyes would meet for half a breath before one of them looked away. It was never clear who turned first. There were no arguments, no harsh words spoken in anger. That too made it worse. One afternoon, rain began to fall without warning, drumming against the roof of the forge. Emma stood just inside the doorway, watching the water streak down the wooden posts. Flynn worked in silence, shaping a simple hinge, his movements precise but tight. I should go before the road turns to mud, Emma said finally. Flynn nodded. That'd be wise. She hesitated, as if waiting for something else to be said. When nothing came, she stepped back into the rain. Flynn stood at the anvil long after the hinge had cooled, staring at the shape he'd ruined by striking too soon. At night, the silence followed him into sleep. He lay awake, listening to the wind move across the plains, thinking of the things he had almost said, the questions he had swallowed. He told himself that quiet was better than the risk of breaking what little they had left. But doubt had found a home between them, and it was patient. Emma felt it too. When she returned to her people, they asked her why she looked tired. She answered that the days were heavy. She did not speak of Flynn, not directly. Some things felt too fragile to carry in words. Each time she came back to the forge, she hoped something would shift, that he would look up and speak her name the way he used to. But Flynn stayed guarded, as if distance might protect them both. The unspoken truth hung between them like smoke. Flynn feared that if he spoke, he would reveal how deeply he cared, and that doing so would make it harder for her to leave if she chose to. Emma feared that if she spoke, she would hear confirmation of what others had already suggested, that this closeness had limits it could not cross. They were standing on opposite sides of the same question, neither willing to ask it. The land itself seemed to reflect their quiet standoff. The days grew shorter. The light faded earlier. Even the forge fire seemed dimmer, as if it sensed the tension in the air. One evening, as the sun sank low, Emma rose from her seat sooner than usual. "I won't stay today," she said. Flynn looked up. "All right." She paused at the edge of the yard, then turned back. For a moment it seemed she might say something more. Her lips parted slightly. Then she shook her head and walked away. Flynn watched her go, his chest tight with words left unspoken. Silence had settled between them, not as peace, but as protection. Each believed they were sparing the other from pain. Neither realized that the silence itself was becoming the sharpest edge. The storm came in hard from the west. By the time Flynn noticed the clouds rolling in, the sky had already darkened to the color of iron before it met the hammer. Wind tore across the plains, bending the grass low. Rain followed soon after, heavy, relentless, drumming against the roof of the forge as if demanding to be let inside. Flynn had planned to close early. The day had been long, his thoughts heavier than the tools in his hands. He banked the fire, ready to let the forge rest, when he heard footsteps cutting through the rain. He turned. Emma stood at the edge of the yard, soaked through, her hair darkened by water, her shawl clutched tightly around her shoulders. She didn't hesitate. She walked straight toward the open doors, rain trailing behind her. "Emma," Flynn said, startled. "I needed to come," she replied. Her voice was steady, but something in her eyes burned brighter than the forge ever had. Flynn moved without thinking, pulling the door wider, guiding her inside. The heat wrapped around them at once, sharp and sudden. Outside, thunder rolled. Inside, the forge glowed low and steady, casting long shadows across the walls. They stood facing each other, rain dripping from her clothes onto the packed earth floor. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Emma drew a breath. "I can't keep walking away without saying this." Flynn's chest tightened. "You don't have to." "Yes," she said gently but firmly, "I do." She stepped closer, stopping just short of the anvil. The firelight caught her face, lit the resolve in her eyes. "They tell me I should want more," she said. "A large house, land that stretches forever, a man with cattle and fences and a future already measured out." Flynn looked away. "They're not wrong." Emma shook her head. "They are." Her voice softened, but it did not weaken. "I don't need a big house. I don't need herds of cattle or a life built on what others think matters." She gestured to the forge. The blackened walls, the tools worn smooth by years of use, the fire that never truly went out. "I need a place that's alive, a place with warmth, with work that means something." She met his eyes again. "I need a man who stands in the fire and stays himself." The words settled deep in him, heavy and undeniable. "I was afraid," Flynn admitted quietly. "Afraid I was keeping you from something better." Emma stepped closer still. "You were afraid of choosing for me." He nodded. "I choose," she said simply. Thunder cracked overhead, close enough to rattle the beams. "I choose to stay," Emma continued. "Not because I don't know what I'm giving up, but because I know what I'm choosing instead." Flynn felt something break open in his chest. Not pain, but release. "You should know," he said, voice rough. "This life isn't easy. It's smoke and heat and long days. I don't have much to offer." Emma reached out, placing her hand over his, soot and all. Her touch was warm, steady. "You offer what lasts," she said. "Honesty, work, fire that doesn't lie." For the first time in days, the silence between them lifted. Flynn turned his hand, clasping hers. The forge seemed to breathe around them, the storm outside fading to a distant roar. "I won't promise you more than I am," he said. "I don't want more," Emma replied. "I want true." They stood there as the rain fell and the fire burned low. The choice made not in words of ceremony, but in the quiet certainty that followed. Outside, the storm began to pass. Inside, something had settled into place. For the first time since doubt had crept between them, Flynn felt steady again. The forge was small. The life ahead would be hard. But under the glow of the fire, with Emma standing beside him by her own choosing, he knew one thing with absolute clarity. Some things were worth more than land or wealth. Some choices once made did not waver. Emma did not move in all at once. There were no wagons piled high with belongings, no announcement made to the town. It happened the way most real changes did on the frontier, quietly, one small step at a time. One evening, she stayed later than usual. Another morning, she arrived before the fire was fully awake. Eventually, the forge no longer felt like a place she visited. It felt like a place she belonged. She began by cooking. At first, it was simple meals prepared near the back room. Beans simmered low, bread warmed carefully near the embers, coffee strong enough to cut through the early cold. Flynn wasn't used to coming in from the forge to the smell of food waiting. It caught him off guard every time, softened the edges of his long days. "You don't have to do that," he said once. Emma smiled without looking up. "I want to." Soon after, she asked to learn. Not just to watch, but to understand. Flynn showed her how to tend the fire properly, how to read its mood by color and sound. He taught her patience first, how rushing steel ruined it, how timing mattered more than strength. Emma listened the way she always did, absorbing each lesson without impatience. Her hands learned quickly. She wasn't afraid of the heat. She didn't flinch at sparks. When she helped him quench a finished piece, steam rising between them, Flynn felt a quiet pride settle in his chest. This wasn't charity or curiosity. This was partnership. Word spread faster than either of them expected. Customers lingered longer. Ranchers brought more work. Some came out of need, others out of curiosity. They found Emma there, steady and capable, passing tools, managing orders, keeping the forge running smoother than it ever had. The forge grew busier. Flynn worked harder than ever, but the work felt lighter now. There was rhythm to it, two people moving around each other without needing to speak. One fire, one purpose. The town noticed. At first there were looks, raised brows, quiet conversations that trailed off when Flynn passed by. But time had a way of dulling sharp edges. People grew used to seeing them together, used to Emma's presence near the forge, used to the idea that this arrangement was not temporary. One afternoon, Rowan rode in again. He dismounted slowly, watching as Emma handed Flynn a tool without breaking stride. The forge hummed with activity, orders stacked neatly on the bench. There was no chaos, only coordination. Rowan waited until the work slowed. "You've built something," he said finally. Flynn wiped his hands and met his gaze. "We have." Rowan looked between them. There was a pause, longer than comfortable, but when he spoke again, his voice held no judgment. She seemed settled. Emma met his eyes calmly. "I am." Rowan nodded once. "Then I was wrong to doubt." That was all he said. It was enough. As seasons turned, the forge became more than a place of work. It became a home in the truest sense, not defined by walls but by shared effort. Evenings were spent side by side, mending tools, preparing meals, sitting quietly as the fire burned low. They argued sometimes about clutter, about timing, about how much heat was too much. But the arguments never lingered. They were learning how to carry life together. Its weight divided, its challenges faced shoulder to shoulder. When days were hard, they endured them together. When days were good, they shared those too. The town stopped watching so closely. Flynn and Emma became part of the landscape, as natural as the forge smoke curling into the sky. Children waved when they passed. Ranchers nodded with respect. The whispers faded, replaced by acceptance. Happiness didn't arrive like a sudden windfall. It grew steadily, built from shared mornings and tired evenings, from knowing there was someone waiting when the work was done. It came from choosing the same fire every day and tending it together. One night, as they sat outside beneath a sky full of stars, Emma leaned against Flynn's shoulder. "This is enough," she said. Flynn looked at the forge, the glow still alive inside. He thought of the doubts that once weighed him down, of the fear that he might not be enough. He knew better now. Happiness, he had learned, wasn't found in ease or abundance. It was found in standing together against whatever came, and choosing, again and again, to stay. And under one roof, beside one fire, that choice felt right. Time moved differently after that. Not faster, not slower, just steadier, like a well-tended flame that no longer threatened to die in the night. The frontier had accepted what it once questioned, the way it always did, by watching, waiting, and finally letting things be. In town, the sight became familiar. The blacksmith at his anvil, shoulders squared, hands sure. The Apache woman beside him, calm and watchful, moving through the forge as if she had always belonged there. People stopped remarking on the difference. It faded into the background, replaced by the simple truth of daily life. The forge stayed busy, tools held strong, horses walked soundly. Work was done, and done well. That was what mattered. On quiet evenings when the last customer had gone and the plains stretched wide and silent beyond the road, Emma would sit near the hearth, watching the fire burn low. Sometimes she spoke, sometimes she didn't. She never felt the need to fill the space. "One thing I know," she said once, her voice soft against the crackle of embers. "No place is warmer than a forge where the fire is kept honest." Flynn glanced at her, the glow reflecting in her eyes. He understood what she meant. The forge had never changed much. The walls were still darkened with soot. The roof still groaned in heavy wind. The work was still hard on the hands and harder on the back. But Flynn no longer measured his life by what it lacked. He no longer wondered if he should be someone else. He had once believed that worth was earned by land, by cattle, by things a man could count. He had learned otherwise. Learned it the way iron learns under heat and pressure, slowly and without ceremony. Steel didn't become strong by wishing itself different. It became strong by enduring the fire. Flynn stood at the anvil one evening, shaping a piece of iron as Emma watched. When the metal was ready, he quenched it, steam rising sharp and bright in the cooling air. The steel held. It always did when treated with care. Emma stepped closer, resting her hand lightly on his arm. No words were needed. Outside, the town settled into night. Lamps flickered. Wind passed over the plains. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, then fell silent. Flynn looked around, the forge, the tools, the woman beside him, and felt something settle deep within his chest. He did not need to chase a different life. He did not need to prove his worth. He did not need to leave the fire he had spent years learning to tend. This was enough. The fire burned low but steady, as it always had. Steel was shaped, cooled, and set aside to serve its purpose. And when the day was done, two people remained, standing where they had chosen to stand, together. On the frontier, many things were taken by force or lost to time, but some things endured, not because they were the strongest or the loudest, but because they stayed. And in the quiet glow of the forge, with the fire still alive and the night pressing in around them, that truth held fast. Love did not choose the mightiest hand. It chose the one that stayed when the fire burned low and knew how to keep it alive.